Welcome back, everyone. This is Chase, and joining me today, Mark Erickson and Jan Fletcher. Thanks for joining me. Mark, the former VP of Sales and Marketing at the North Face, and Jan really ran, production, offshore production at the North Face as well. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate you both joining today. It's great to see you.
Fun to be here.
Yeah, it was. This is a conversation I've wanted to have for a while. I know we've been in touch and going back and forth trying to schedule a time. So I'm glad that we could make it work. And everyone I've talked to has kept telling me you need to talk to Mark and Jan. So schedule that, make that happen. So that, Hap was the first, and then Sally McCoy, both affiliated with the North Face, just, really kept pushing me to do this. So I'm glad that we could make it work. So,
right.
I want to really just kind of dive into your involvement in the industry and specifically with the North Face, but maybe taking a step back. When did both of you what was your first exposure to the outdoors? And what was that first connection for you? When did the light bulb go off and you realized, you connected with the outdoors in that way?
I think my first exposure to the outdoors is when my mom took me home from the hospital. And it was freezing cold outside in Hamilton, Ohio. And I thought, wow, really? I'm going to go back inside. Now, where did I start then? When I guess when I think about this, aside from, I was never a Boy Scout or anything like that. As a high school kid or a grade school kid, I would pal around with my pals and we'd go out and, camp out by the creek and do Tom Sawyer-ish kind of things like that. But I think it was when I graduated from college. I went to Northwestern University. I graduated there in 1969, and I'd been studying radio, television, and film. I'd originally thought maybe I'd be an actor, but then I had a dose of good sense hit me in the head, and I switched my major to radio, television, and film. Anyway, I was there. There I was in Chicago or Evanston, and it was 1969, summer of 1969, and there's a lot of stuff going on in the world, Vietnam War, protests. A general drift among the youth culture towards to get back to the land. There was this idea that we could get the hell out of the city and we'll go up and we'll camp out in the mountains and that's where we'll live and we'll have communes and all that sort of thing. A very kind of a, Edenic view of what life could be. And then I kind of stumbled on the North Face kind of by accident, just because I was looking for a job. And I was so enthralled by what I saw there, what was going on there, that all of a sudden it really did kindle an interest for me in the outdoors and using this stuff, but also figuring out how it got made and how to make it. And so I guess to answer your question a little bit more directly, I'd say my interest in being outdoors, my first exposure to the outdoors industry was when I started at the North Face.
That's a great first exposure.
Yeah. In those days, and I'll send you this balance sheet from 1968. Now that precedes, I started at the North Face in May of 1970. So, but still, it was just a very nascent stage. The company was a mere, peanut compared to what it would eventually become.
Right. Jan, what about you?
Well, I always was a nature lover, but I didn't do much backpacking or camping when I was young. But I graduated from Cal Berkeley in '74 with a degree in psychology, which was useless. So I just started looking for a job, and Berkeley was really a hotbed of outdoor companies. So I went to Class 5, Sierra Designs. I went to all of them, and I happened upon the North Face, and I was sitting, getting an interview as a receptionist. And the woman who was the receptionist did not return from lunch that day. She decided to stay with her boyfriend somewhere. So the woman who was interviewing me said, "You've got the job." So I got a job as a receptionist at the North Face. And, it was very exciting. And I became, a camper and a backpacker. But it was a very exciting place to work. It was small. You were able to get involved in a lot of different aspects of product design and the way the company worked. So I worked in customer service for, I don't know. After receptionist, I worked in customer service for several years. Then I worked in the design department with Mark for, 4 or 5 years. And then I transitioned over into production. So anyway, I was there from 74 until 88, I guess. And I learned so much about the business and the product. And I was very fortunate that I just happened to show up at the North Face that day, and it all worked out.
Well, for both of you, what other companies, I kind of know some of the companies that were operating around that time. Like you both said, this was a hotbed. And in a previous episode, we talked about the hot spots of gear around the country, and certainly Denver, Boulder, with Jerry and Holy Bar in the early days, Pacific Northwest, and then in California, you have a lot of activity in various regions in the country or in the state. What were the other companies around that time, and what was it about the North Face that jumped out to both of you?
You were the only one that hired me, so actually,
did you go to some of the other companies?
I went to Class 5, and Eustace Bauschinger himself said, "We aren't hiring," and sent me on my way. And
there's another good guy to talk to, Chase, he'd be
great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And then Sierra Designs, they were there. Trying to remember, I wasn't that interested in retail, so I mainly went to the little shops that were there. I don't know about you, Mark. Did you try any others?
I didn't try any of the other outdoor companies because in spring of 1970, that predates Class 5, for example. They were around. In fact, it was Eustace Bauschinger that showed me how to use a pair of scissors and how to thread a sewing machine. And Sierra Designs was there, but again, in a very nascent stage. Ski Hut was there. But I don't know. I don't know that I was so aware of those companies. I had been, kind of in a different world. I worked at a bookstore up on the campus. Then I did a stint as a bartender, and I got really tired of that. And so I just started kind of looking around for another job, particularly in the section of town I was in down on San Pablo Avenue at that time. So I had a bicycle, and I would ride my bike up one street in Berkeley, and I'd go down a block, and I'd go back the other on the next street down. And I would stop in any place that looked like it was a viable business. And I don't know if you know that part of West Berkeley, but it's mostly houses. It's kind of little small cottagey type houses and very few businesses. And the businesses that are there are, I don't know, I think there was maybe a glass shop and a welder and, a plumber and that kind of stuff. But I finally, one day, I don't know exactly what it was, but I rode my bike past his warehouse down on 4th Street, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm sorry, 5th Street.
5th Street.
Huh?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5th.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th Street. And the warehouse doors were open. And so I looked in, and there was this noise emanating. It sounded like a bunch of birds chirping. And I looked in there, and there were all these billowing piles of nylon. and you know, yellow and orange and blue and all this stuff. And and what it was the Chinese ladies sitting there sewing the products or trimming the loose threads off the finished products on the inspection table. And I said, wow, I want to work here. And so I kind of, you know, threw myself there on the front steps, and Jack Gilbert, who was the #2 guy there at the time, he said, no, we're not hiring. We don't need anybody. And as I said, Jack, I said, Mr. Gilbert, probably. I said, I really want to work here. He said, well, I'm sorry. We just don't have any jobs right now. I said, okay, I'm going to come back. I went back every week for 5 weeks, and I got the same answer. On the 6th week, he said, oh my God, you again? And he said, oh, geez, I'm tired of looking at you. So he gave me a broom and a pair of trimming scissors. And he said, if you're not using one of these, make sure you're using the other. Meaning, just go in there and keep yourself busy. And I said, well, that sounds great, Mr. Gilbert. What's the pay? He said, I think I can start you at $2.50 an hour. And I said, $2.50? Really? Man, I'll take it. I took my last job, I was making $2 an hour. So I was in hog heaven from day one there, pretty much. And without going on too long about that, I was just amazed by what I saw there, the level of activity and the humanity, the community that I could see going on there, plus this really cool product. I had only seen a goose down sleeping bag once before in my life. And that's when my older brother returned from a trip to France. In those days, college kids in that era would take the summer off and figure out a way to hitchhike around Europe. And he'd gotten this French down sleeping bag, duvet. And he brought that thing back, and I thought, that is just the strangest looking piece of gear I've ever seen. And then to come upon the North Face, and there were just piles of these things. And they're showing, you know, how they could stuff them down into just like a tenth of its normal volume. And that just blew my mind. And so I was hooked from very early on. And one thing led to another.
It is interesting that you have whole websites now, as we talked about Bruce Johnson, right? Talking about the history of gear. So I can't imagine you're the only one who feels drawn to product, right? And it's hard to explain why that is, right? Why you can look at a sleeping bag and say, that is really cool, right? Even like you said, you hadn't had really any experience with the product prior to that. But for both of you, what do you think that is? What is it about product that has drawn you in or kept you involved in that industry for such a long time?
Well, when I started, very soon after I started, the whole oval intention, that whole product category started to be developed. And I just found the whole creative process so interesting. I wasn't involved in design at the time, but if you were at the North Face, you were involved because it was so small. And I just remember the excitement of, researching different materials and, looking at prototypes. And so I was very drawn to the product side of things at that point, and became interested in the gear side of it rather than the clothing side, even though clothing became such a big part of, later business. But I just love the energy around the creative activity involved in the product.
To me, it was about, maybe the process of putting things together, taking some raw materials and creating something out of it. And I guess it's the act of creation itself that was fascinating to me, and every single step of it. Jack would, put me in charge of cutting webbing strips for the backpacks over a hot wire. I'm sitting there breathing all these nylon fumes, happy as I could be, figuring out the length they needed to be. And then I started to think, if this thing was a couple inches longer, we'd be able to do this. I started to put two and two together and think about ways the product could be enhanced or improved.
Right.
And that was a great stimulus for me. And I should say at this time, I was just a single guy. I didn't have a wife and kids I had to, take care of. I was just kind of footloose and fancy free. So I'd go in there, before the shift started in the morning. I wouldn't leave till 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. I just loved every part of it. But it was the making of and the figuring out how to transform materials and make them do something that, they're just inert materials laying on a table. I think another thing that kind of fascinated me was the sewing process and how one sewed something together. How does a machine work? How do you thread a machine? And so I would be looking over the shoulders of the sewing machine operators, and then sure enough, the machine would break. Oh, Mr. Erickson, could you please call somebody? I said, well, let me take a look at it and see. So I gradually kind of, with the help of these Chinese sewing machine operators, started to figure out I became a sewing machine mechanic. I'd never been a sewing machine mechanic before, but to this day, I can adjust the timing on a sewing machine and figure out why the stitch is skipping and adjust the tension and all that kind of stuff.
That story, it just makes me think of, I had a really good conversation. I recorded one of these with Jim and Greg Thompson as well, and talked with them about wilderness experience, as well as kind of their second act, right? All the other things that they went on to do. But I believe it was Greg that told me how he started getting into making, and how I can't remember, I had this recorded, but I think he ended up buying a sewing machine, a broken one, and tore it apart. And he had his Jack Daniels there, and he'd take it apart. And if he couldn't figure it out, he'd take a shot, and then, take something else apart, and take another shot. And he just, by taking apart the equipment and putting it back to, he couldn't get it back together. He had to go back to the wherever the repair, whoever he bought it from, right? He had to take it back in pieces, and they helped him put it back together. But there's something about machines and getting involved in the making and that tactile experience that I think draws people in. And it reminds me of, we have one of our students from our first graduating class. She told me one time how she got into product design. She was on a backpacking trip, and for hours was looking at the person's back in front of her, and staring at that backpack, and kind of having this realization that someone made that, right? Someone had to design that and pattern it out and sew it together. And that was kind of her awakening when it came to, people get paid to do that. Someone makes these things.
Right.
And that led her to our program eventually. And now she's working in the industry doing it herself, which is amazing. So there's something to that.
Make a note here of another great attraction for me to working for the North Face at that time, was that in the warehouse right next to the North Face was the rehearsal studio for Creedence Clearwater Revival.
Oh, wow.
Which at that time, this would have been 1970, 71, right in there. They were bigger than the Beatles. And they were preparing to go on a European tour. And so they would roll, because it was hot, and they would roll up their warehouse door and start cranking Proud Mary and all these Creedence Clearwater hits. And I thought, we were all dancing in the aisles and just having a great time. And so that was part of it. I guess what I'm getting at, it's not so much Creedence Clearwater per se, but this idea of community, the idea that you're in some place where stuff is happening, and it's exciting stuff. Is it going to change the world? We don't know, but it seems like it's going to change the world. And here we are, right, practically ground zero for that. And that was a very big motivator for me.
Well, Hap mentioned that was the goal, right? It's like we want to make product that changes the world. So it seems like that came across to the employees. Yeah. That was part of the culture, and you felt that. So you were kind of just, both of you were kind of just working these you just had these first jobs. You were doing whatever you could do to get into the industry, which is something I still recommend to students. It's
absolutely
do whatever you can, right? It's like sweep the floors, just get in. There's someone that we know, not in our program, but works for one of our partner companies. He would just job shadow at a footwear brand. He was a graphic designer, and he would go to this company and just be there and observe one day a week. And then eventually they just said, well, while you're here, you might as well do something, right? Get to work.
Exactly.
So that principle still stands, right? Like that's still an opportunity. But when did you both get the opportunity to transition into maybe more into what you'd be doing longer term, like actually working with the product? I know, Mark, you were in production, so you were working with the product, but when did you make that transition to design? And Jan, same for you. When did you make that transition from reception to working with product?
I can remember it like it was yesterday. It was late in the day. I think it was a Friday afternoon. And I was down puttering around. I think I was cleaning up. We'd cut a stack of ripstop nylon to make sleeping bags. And I think I was cleaning up the table after that. And Eustace, who was my boss at that time, went upstairs up on the mezzanine level of the building there where Hap's office was. And it was quiet. Everybody else had gone home for the day. And all of a sudden I hear this loud argument happening, these guys yelling at each other. And I thought, gee whiz, I was completely flummoxed. I didn't know what to think. And the next thing I know is Eustace is bounding down the stairs, followed by Hap. And, Eustace is saying, I quit. And Hap is saying, you can't quit. I'm going to fire you. No, I quit. No, I'm firing you. And then Eustace was gone. And I take that back. There was another fellow there, a guy by the name of Mike Revisa. And he'd been in on this argument. And it was clear that Mike and Hap had decided that Eustace had to go for whatever reason. You'd have to ask Eustace about that, or Hap. Well, Hap will tell you. He'll tell you.
I'll have to ask both.
But I'll let him tell you, not me. Anyway, this guy Mike came down afterwards, and the dust had kind of settled a little bit, and I'm sitting there kind of still shaking, wondering what just happened to my boss. And Mike says, Mark, kind of put his hand on my shoulder. He says, how would you like to be the North Face designer? And I said, geez, I don't know. I said, can I have the weekend to think about it? What was I thinking? I should have just leaped up and down and said, absolutely, sign me up. I said, no, let me think about it over the weekend. Well, needless to say, Monday morning I came in, and I was raring to go. I was all ready to go. And that was how I became the designer to North Face. Why me? Beside the fact that I was the only guy around at that hour, I think I was one of the few people that knew where the paper patterns were stored for the sleeping bags and the outerwear and all of it, because it was all on craft paper in those days. You didn't have computer patterns. And, we had these patterns stuffed all over the place, and nobody really knew where they were except Eustace. And he kept that stuff very close to his chest, but I knew where they were. And so I think that was perhaps the deciding qualification in my favor.
Jan, what was that transition like for you?
My story isn't nearly as interesting. I started as a receptionist and then went on to customer service. And, the North Face at that time was it was small, and it was growing at the time. So there were a lot of jobs becoming available within the company. And I have to credit HAP and I suppose the rest of the management at the North Face giving me a chance to work in the design department, for instance. I'd been in customer service for a few years, and a job opened up over in design. I had no background in that, but go ahead, try it. And so I worked there for several years, managing the processes in the design department. I didn't do any actual designing, but I helped with the preparation of designs for production and interfaced with engineering, which are things that I enjoy. So I just had so many opportunities to get involved in so many aspects of the company. Anyway, so I worked in design for several years, and then I got involved in production and making these products that we'd been working on in design and making sure that we could produce them. So anyway, that's how I got involved in design.
You know, Jan made a comment there that is probably worth elaborating on a little bit, which is it's a credit to HAP that he saw in the likes of me or Jan or really any number of people I can think of, contemporaries at that time. He saw something there. So it wasn't that you had to come in with a resume and, a bunch of degrees and a bunch of prior experience, or even any particular expertise. But if he saw something like in me, I suppose, I'd like to think he saw this drive and just this sheer enthusiasm. And at least I knew how to put two and two together. I wasn't a total klutz when it came to that sort of thing. And he gave people a chance and an opportunity. And in doing so, he created this special little place and time and place. It changed, obviously, dramatically over time. But there's a lot of folks there at that time who would say the same thing, that, they said, well, HAP just asked me to do it. Surprise, surprise. And it's a wonderful thing in a leader to be able to, kind of look beyond just the surface of a person's resume or first impressions and find something deeper there, find to be able to mine whatever commitment is inside that person and then to turn it to productive use. It's a great leadership skill.
Yeah, they promoted from within almost always. Very few, people were hired from outside to come in and run departments. They were usually kind of brought up from the bottom, and
which had its pluses and minuses. I mean, we weren't all geniuses, and there were some things for which we probably weren't particularly well qualified, and there should have been somebody who came in from the outside. So it wasn't that it was just this wellspring of genius, dripping off the rafters. On the other hand, when people from the outside would come in to assume positions, particularly if they got the job over you, then the whole vibe started to change. And now we had, for want of a better word, politics, I suppose, entering into the picture. Mm-hmm. But that's another story.
Right. When did you two first meet?
At the North Face.
Yeah.
When would that have been? Was it when, Jan, you went into design?
1974, when I showed up.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't know Jan before she started. So I must have been working there for 3 years already, almost 4 years.
Right.
So, yep.
And then I'm curious what, for both of you, I guess for Mark, when you took over design, what were the big sellers, leading up to you taking over? And then we can get into, where do you start as the new lead designer for the North Face, from there. But
Yeah.
what was the North Face really producing at that time? What were the big
They were
products?
producing, probably the number one seller was the Sierra Parka,
Mm-hmm.
which, as I think probably everybody knows, was one of the very first goose down filled parkas. And there's a funny story about that, because when I finally pulled the patterns out of the closet and laid them out on the table to get ready to cut some Sierra Parkas, I realized that the neck opening on the size small was bigger than the neck opening on the size extra large. And I thought, well, that's screwy. Why is that? And once I looked into it, I saw what was going on. It turns out the fellow who we used models, human beings, he didn't have anthropometric charts and all that kind of stuff to figure out sizing. So there was a guy who worked in the shipping department. I swear he couldn't have been more than 5 feet 2 inches tall and built like a fire plug. Oh, he had a neck like this. He was the model for the size small Sierra Parka. On the other hand, Jack Gilbert, who stands 6'6", Jan, or pretty damn close to it. He was a beanpole, so his neck was tiny. He was the model for the extra large. And that's the way I said, oh my God, we're going to have to fix that right away. Anyway, Sierra Parka, despite the goofy sizing, that was probably the big seller. There were a really popular sleeping bag at that time was the Unimog. And that was a rectangular bag, and that was cool because you could, it was a full zip, so you could kind of pancake one on top of the other, and then you and your sweetheart could sleep together in the same sleeping bag, as it were. Very popular thing to do in camping in those days. There were tents. There were a couple of tents. One was a Sierra tent. No, wait, I'm sorry. The Tuolumne, what we call the T tent, the Tuolumne tent. A-frame in front and an I-pole in back. That was our lightweight tent at that time. And that still came in at, I want to say 5 or 6 pounds or something like that. There was a mountain tent that was a double A-frame tent. Those were big sellers. The Unimog sleeping bag. We didn't have any fiber-filled sleeping bags in those days. We had a backpack called the Ruth sack. And that was named after a guy named Gordon Ruth, R-U-T-H. I never met Gordon Ruth. I don't know to this day who that is. All I know is that pack was called the Ruth sack. And that was a very early version of an internal frame pack. And, I think we had a guide pack and we had a day pack.
Yeah, the day pack, yeah.
Yeah. And that was it.
So when you started to lead the design, where do you go from there? You inherit a design, all of the design for the North Face and all of these past products. Where do you go from there? What was kind of the first order of business?
Well, you start getting input, from others, notably the sales reps. You say, oh, geez, I wish I had a lighter weight tent I could sell on my territory. I could sell that. If we added 3 or 4 more colors to the Sierra Parka, blah, 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 blah. And so that's one source of input. And, the other is some, rudimentary sales analysis of what was selling and what wasn't. And, then you go to the repair department and say, what's working? What's failing, what seems to be holding together, what needs to be corrected. And so those are your probably your key inputs. I look back on some of the things that I'll have to take credit for or blame one or the other for being ideas that I had about product. And I was so fortunate to be able, again, there wasn't a lot of, oh no, don't do this, don't do that. Go ahead, try it, man. Let's try it. Let's put it together, see if it works, see what happens. Let's run it up the flagpole. And so there were a number of things like that that I was able to, prototype and then actually made it into the line. One of the first ones of those was a tent called the Morning Glory. And that was, if you've ever seen any pictures of that, that was kind of a big A-frame, central A-frame and then 2 eye poles at the end. So it was the idea of making a 4-person tent as light as we could, of course. And this is pre-geodesics.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I basically, the brainchild, it wasn't really a brainchild, what I did is take 2 of what we called the T tents, the tuolumne tents, and I put them together face to face. You know, conceptually at least. And that became the Morning Glory, which was our first 4-person tent. And, you know, on and on and on from there.
Right. Well, on the topic of tents, we should talk about the oval intention for sure, and kind of the origins of that, and the different players that were involved. It seems like there's a few core people, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on. Well, maybe I can tee up the conversation. It seemed like a lot was happening in the tent space, kind of leading up to this moment. And we did a whole episode, me and Bruce Johnson, kind of about the evolution of tents. And like you said, that the A-frame was the dominant tent for for decades.
Yeah.
There's no real variation.
The Civil War.
So yeah, really, that since the pup tents, right? It seemed like Bruce and I kind of talked about, Jack Stephenson's tunnel tent, the elliptical art was really, the game changer there. And a lot of that was driven by material changes, right? Material innovation, and his outsider kind of perspective, right? Coming with an engineering background and really thinking about aerodynamics and materials and bringing things from other industries into that. So that's before 75, of course, but it seems like that's you start to see some changes, and a lot of this is driven by materials of the time, I imagine. But from your perspective, what kind of led to this moment? I know there's a few different factors and a few different individuals, but if you don't mind sharing kind of the story of that tent, that would be great.
Yeah. Well, first, let me preface it by saying, at least to my way of thinking, there wasn't so much innovation in materials at that time. I know at the North Face, we had 3 basic materials. We had 1.9 ounce ripstop nylon. We had that in 3 colors. No, a 4th color, Acapulco gold, the yellow. We had 420 denier pack cloth, 3 colors, green, orange, navy. We had urethane coated nylon, taffeta, that we used for the cagoules. And so there was this interchangeability, transferability of these basic materials, whether it was a pack, a tent, a sleeping bag, they're all made out of the same materials. So,
except the temple.
Later on we get into some material innovations, but I've always had kind of a jaundiced view about that. I think that the industry still is largely based on a few basic fibers, a few basic technologies, and there are, I'm sure that somebody can say, "Oh, what about Primaloft?" or "Oh, what about this?" But I think it's a smaller universe of material innovation than a larger one myself. Rather, maybe I'm just congratulating myself on being able to figure out how to use, a fabric that you use for a down jacket, and how do you make a tent out of it. But anyway, the oval intention, Bruce Hamilton is a name that you're no doubt familiar with. Perhaps you've talked to him already. If you haven't.
Not yet. I'd love to.
Yeah, you must. Bruce was a guy who came to the North Face in a lot of this, in some ways the same way I did, which is he just kind of stumbled upon the place. And he was, a guy from back east. He'd gone to Vanderbilt, I think. And he was a math whiz. And, but he had hair down to his waist, and he was just a hippie that was looking for a good time, as we all were in Berkeley in those days. And he and I actually shared, we lived in 2 different flats. He and his posse lived on the top floor, and I lived on the bottom floor on 8th Street. And that's another whole side story. But anyway, I introduced Bruce to the North Face. And he got hired on first as what we called a downer. and which is kind of a funny name, even in those days. But it was the guy who pumped the goose down into this goose down sleeping bags. And so it was you don't want to hear about that job. Anyway, Bruce did that just to make some money. And, you know, finally, he obviously had an interest in math. He was, I'd call him a Buckminster Fuller acolyte. And in that he had read everything and anything that Bucky Fuller had ever uttered or had written, and was very interested in geodesics. And that was about it. Now along comes a guy named Bob Gillis. And Bob Gillis, you're nodding your head, so you must have heard about this guy.
I've actually talked with his daughter a little bit from Shelter Systems. I know that she ran the company for a time, and I know he's still around, but it sounds like he's not in great health. But
oh, that's a shame. I haven't kept in touch with him. Anyway, Bob came to the North Face with his invention, which was I'd have to say it's kind of a precursor to the oval intention in some ways. And it was little more than a square piece of coated nylon with a crisscross pattern of fiberglass wands that were tethered to the square piece of nylon with O-rings. And he came up to the office one day. I remember he pulled up in his Volkswagen van, and the little girl, who probably was his daughter, was she tumbled out of the van. She couldn't have been more than 3 years old, if that. Anyway, he proceeds to kind of insert these rods in this big piece of nylon, and he kind of squishes it all together and pegs it down to the ground somehow and says, "See, here it is. Isn't this brilliant?" And I know Bruce and I were looking at it and thinking, not so much. Hap, gosh darn that guy Hap, he saw something there. And so he engaged Bob, and I don't know what the terms of the thing were, but Bob started working with us and collaborating with us. That didn't last very long. And the history there is a little foggy in my mind here at the second, but I could probably figure out what had gone on there exactly. But as I recall, his association, we started going in a different direction, partly because Bruce said, wait a minute. If we do this in geodesics, we're going to get a much more efficient structure. And it's producible, it's not just a square piece of nylon. At any rate, we kind of went off on our own tangent. Partly, I suppose, because we know more than this guy Bob Gillis knows, and partly because we thought we had a better idea. And Bruce understood the geodesics. He didn't know anything about cutting fabric or sewing the pieces of fabric together. That's where I came in. And so we made a good team. And I remember we had a back room by now the factory had moved up to Harrison Street, or Gilman Street. 1011 Gilman Street. And we had a little design room back there, and we started putting together just these shapes. And eventually, that what came out of that was the oval intention, which is the first of our geodesic attempts. There was another competitive force. You mentioned some of the other brands and their efforts. I think the ones that we had our eye on was Jansport, because they had a dome tent. We could kind of tell that dome was way to go instead of A-frame, because there's more volume, you're enclosing more volume for less surface area, blah, blah, blah. And potentially a more stable structure, more windworthy and so forth, snowworthy. And so we had Bruce said, no, it's gotta be an oval. And usually, when you're looking at geodesic forms, usually they're these regular spherical or half spherical forms. And they said, no, this has got to be oval. And so we said, okay, well, let's figure that out. What that meant was we couldn't use a single pole length. We had to use several different pole lengths to affect an oval shape. No, that's okay. but we came out with the oval intention, and Bruce named it the oval intention. And a play on words there, right? And you know, that was the origin of that, and it was rocky going at first because we took that thing to a sales meeting, and we priced the thing out. It was going to be, I think, we're the most expensive tent in our line at that time was $175 maybe. That was the mountain tent where it had snow flaps and frost liner and all kinds of gewgaws on it. Well, our tent, our oval intention, came out at $235. Ooh, how's that going to work? And so anyway, we took that to the sales meeting, and I think, you know, the reception among the reps was a little tepid at first. But we said, no, yeah, give it a chance. Go and just show it. Just pitch it for a few people. And pretty soon it caught on. And why? Because it looked unusual. It looked different from any other tent at the time. It kind of had a groovy Bucky Fuller aura about it. And it performed remarkably well. I mean, it was, you know, not literally bomb-proof, but I mean, it was really, really very wind-resistant, and everybody's going, wow, this thing really works. What do we got here? And no sooner did we start feeling pretty good about ourselves than the poles started breaking. And the poles were something that technology we had borrowed from the sport archery industry. And there's an outfit, they're still on today, Easton Aluminum. And in those days, they weren't making tent poles. They were making hockey sticks and archery, arrows for archery. And they had these leftover lengths from making the arrows that were too long or too short or whatever weren't working. And so somehow we met up with this guy, Jim Easton, and started figuring, well, gee whiz, maybe we could use this stuff to make tent poles. 7071 T6 aluminum tubing. And gosh darn it, that stuff was ace, man. That was, you could string these things together and everything was wonderful. And so we were just, you know, we were going along 60 miles an hour. And then we get these reports of the tent poles breaking. And we said, well, surely some guy sat on it, or there was some excessive load, something fell on it. Blah, blah, blah. And the dealer would say, no, I'm sorry, it was sitting on my showroom floor. And the tents broke, and the poles just popped. And at that point, we thought, oh my God, what have we got here? I'm not a metallurgist. Bruce wasn't. We called the guy at Easton Aluminum. We said, geez, I don't know. We've never had that problem before, because they had never been pulled and hold them in tension the way we were doing. We were making bows out of them, right? You don't do that with an arrow shaft. It's straight as an arrow. And so, doggone it, we had to, we were scratching our heads on that one. We went up to the metallurgy department at UC Berkeley and got an audience with a couple of metallurgists up there who said, let's see what's going on here. And they recalled that a similar thing had happened in World War II with ships breaking in half suddenly. And it was due to a phenomenon called stress corrosion cracking, which basically was, in our case, something as innocuous as the sweat on your hands, rubbing against the tent poles, the sweat, the salt content, I suppose, of the sweat, perspiration, infiltrating the molecular, the spaces between the molecules in the metal. I mean, it was microscopic at the molecular level, and eroding or corroding the material, so that suddenly it would just, boom, it just pop. And then we had to figure out a solution to that. And the Easton guy said, well, let's try a little bit different alloy. And then came 7075 T6 aluminum. And that was a little bit softer alloy. And we thought, no, it's going to bend. It's going to bend too fast and take a set. And it did. It bent a little bit and took a set a little bit faster than we really wanted, but it wasn't breaking that way. And I remember how we were testing these poles. I had a, those little troughs if you're hanging wallpaper, and the wallpaper paste goes in it. It's a long, narrow trough, about like, a foot long, something like that, 3 or 4 inches deep. And we had one of those, and we filled it up with salt water. And then we would make hoops out of the pole sections. We'd make a 7-section hoop. We'd make an 8-section hoop. We'd make a 6-section hoop, all different diameters of hoops. And then we would set them in the saltwater solution and attach we had an alarm clock plugged into the wall, and we would take a string and attach the one end of the string to the hoop and the other end of the string to the plug on the alarm clock, plugged into the wall, right? Then we go home for the day. And we come back the next day to see if we had any hoops broken. And sure enough, the ones that were really tight, they had broken. But we were able to tell exactly how many hours it had taken in the solution, because you could go over and look at this little alarm clock. And the power had pulled out, at 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever it was. And, boy, we thought we were pretty darn smart back then, I'll tell you.
I mean, I think that's pretty smart.
Well, again,
You had to be
everything's kind of ad hoc,
Right. Well, you're inventing your own testing.
That you had on hand.
Yeah, you're inventing your own testing processes.
Exactly.
I mean, that's the really interesting thing. And I think fast forward to today, it seems like the companies that really push the envelope and push innovation, that's a word that gets thrown around a lot, right? But it seems like the companies that are really pushing it are the ones that invent new processes, right? New ways of testing, new ways of constructing, new ways of manufacturing, right? So
yeah.
You were on the leading edge of that, on the material side, or applying a material in a new way, and then testing it in a new way, right? Most people would probably sit back and say, I don't know how to do that. And
well,
we
I
can't
don't
find
know.
anyone who can, right? So
perhaps some of the folks you have entering your program, maybe they've got an engineering background or a chemistry background or something like that, and they would listen to the story I just told and say, "What is that guy talking about? That's not the way we do things." But that's the way we did it then.
Right. Jan, now a lot of this was happening in 75, and you started with the company in 74.
Yeah.
Is that right?
I was in customer service when the poles were breaking.
So people were
Yeah.
yelling at you, or did you get a lot of bad feedback, or what was that?
Well,
What were you
I think
hearing?
people were, the job was to tell them that we were taking care of it. And I do remember that we had a huge recall of tent poles. And, I always admired the North Face for stepping up and taking responsibility for the problem. And it was costly. It was very costly, I'm sure. And, but it wasn't, you try to fool them, try to make them think it's all fine. And they admitted, no, we have a problem. Bring all those back. We've got a solution. And so I was in customer service at the time, and that's how it was handled. And I will say that the other thing about the North Face, it was very collaborative, that they always sought input. The design department always sought input from customer service or people on the floor, or everyone had input into the process. And so I felt like at the time we were right in the middle of it too. And it was a very exciting time.
Well, that idea of a recall, that was unheard of.
Yeah, it was very, very, it was a bold step.
Recalls were something that the automobile companies did, right?
Right. Well, when it's a matter of safety, right? I think especially when you're creating a product that is supposed to protect people from the elements. And who knows? Right. I don't know if you sold this product to anyone who was taking it out into super extreme environments. Anyone, right? Sure. I'm sure you did. I mean, this is a matter of safety. So it is impressive.
It
but the
was all
company.
that. And then, of course, it was a matter of protecting the brand.
Right. Sure.
Because the North Face, it was, things were fragile back then.
Right.
And the last thing we needed was to have that as a black mark on our record, that our tent, those lousy North Face tents, the poles break all the time.
Right.
So we
right.
were falling all over ourselves to make sure that, to correct that situation. And like Jan says, I think that's something that the company should be very proud of. And gosh, I wish more companies these days would, to use the quote, man up, and own up to their problems and not just try to shine them on and hope nobody notices.
Right. Right.
Well,
No,
it was
I
a
agree.
very high profile product for the North Face at the time.
Yeah.
And its success was pretty important.
Crucial.
And so to have that happen on those first orders, the fact that they were prepared to bring them all back, not the tents themselves, but the poles. We brought the poles back and exchanged the poles once we had
a solution.
Poles, yeah, once we had a solution.
Right. I'm curious, and another one of these individuals, we touched on Bucky Fuller and his involvement. Did he ever give any formal contribution to the design? I seem to remember, I think Hap showed me a letter, and so there was conversation back and forth. Was there ever advice or feedback or design input? Did he take a crack at designing some of this?
As you said, no. That's a busy man.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Really, and he had bigger fish to fry than the little old North Face. He was very generous with his time when he was able to give it to us. And I can remember having, what would you call them, design charrettes or something like that, sitting around and looking at sketches and soliciting ideas and bouncing ideas back and forth. And actually, I don't know if you've seen that, but Bruce has got some transcripts of those sessions, which you should ask him about.
No, I haven't seen those.
And that was interesting, but that was the extent of the formal collaboration with Bucky.
Right.
I know there was a correspondence going back and forth. Oh, Bucky, we'd love to have you design something for us. But like I said, that's a busy man. He had a lot of stuff.
Right. I think that's one of the letters that I saw. It was, and his response was something to the effect that he'd love to help where he could. Right. And maybe that's what led to the charrette. But no, that's really interesting. So obviously, very positive response once a solution was presented for the polls. Was there a product that you ever worked on really from beginning to end, or you really felt ownership over? And you happened to see someone using it out and about in the wild, and I've asked other designers about that, and maybe their first product they ever designed, they actually see someone who bought it and they don't know the person. They're not, related, or it's not someone who knows someone from the company. It's just someone out on the street. And a lot of the people that I've asked that question, they remember the first time that they saw someone using their product.
Well, I guess by the time I was involved in the product, it was primarily clothing, I believe, that was what I was working on. And I remember the mountain parka and the surprise I had when the mountain parka, not that I saw any one individual, but that I saw so many people wearing the mountain parka in all manner of ways. I saw them on the streets in Berkeley. We saw them in New York City when we were on the street. So I would say the mountain parka was the time when it was a product that I was involved in from its inception to its production, and it really took off. And seeing that in so many different settings was something that I remember.
I can remember getting feedback. Photographs would come back. Hey, we use your tent in 65-mile-an-hour winds. Here's a picture of it standing up, and you think, damn, that makes me feel good. I remember one time, I think it was maybe it was the VE24, it might have been the Oval, but myself, Bruce, a couple other guys, John McLaughlin and Bob Gorton. Bob Gorton was the retail manager at that time, and John McLaughlin was the finance guy or something. He was didn't have anything to do with design. And we decided we were going to go on a cross-country trip up in the Sierras. So one Friday afternoon, we piled everything, cross-country skis and tents and packs. And Bob Gorton, I remember, he insisted on taking really good Cabernet Sauvignon and these filet mignons. I don't know how he thought he was going to cook those things, but he had to have. And so it wasn't exactly, a real Spartan camping trip, but we park, we strap on our skis, backpacks and so forth, and we start. I remember we were on the eastern slope, and so we start skiing west, and as we did that, the sky is getting darker and darker. Now a snow blizzard comes in. We said, holy shit, we better pitch our tents and buckle down here. And we did, and we got inside those tents, and the snow, I swear to God, must have been a foot of snow, maybe more. Wet, Sierra cement, they call it, coming down. And that tent, I swear to God, I stayed up most of the night waiting for the thing to just implode, but it never did. And I remember getting out the next morning, and the guy from the retail store said to me and Bruce, he said, I think you guys designed a pretty good tent. And that made us feel pretty good. Now, there's another time I saw a guy wearing a vest that I had designed. And it's called the Sylvester. And we can go into another whole podcast about design mistakes. And, I wish the designs I wish I had. I saw this guy wearing this god-awful, ugly thing. At the time, when we were doing it, I thought, well, that's kind of cool, okay. But later, when I actually saw it in context out on the street, I said, oh my God, I wonder if I should go up and offer to buy that thing back from the guy, and just so I can take it out of circulation. I don't think I did. I think he got away from me, but that was a time when I saw my product in use, and I thought, maybe not such a great idea.
Well, along those lines, I guess, are there any successes between that 75, the release of the Oval Intention, and 85 when the Parka comes out? We'll talk about the Parka. 10 years, that's a lot of product to come out, and probably a lot of changes at the company. What was happening over those 10 years leading up to the release of the Mountain Parka? Any notable events or moments for you?
Well, product-wise, we elaborated on the original Oval Intention with the VE23, the VE24, and subsequent. Then we kind of veered away from the pure geodesic into some other kind of hoop tent designs. So the tent design thing was evolving, as it was, I'm sure, in every company. Let's try to make this thing lighter. More compact. Not necessarily, we don't necessarily need to make it more bomb-proof, but we do need to make it lighter. So that was the kind of the design trend that was going on in the tent department. And the sleeping bags, during that period of time, we were just getting killed in the marketplace because we didn't have a fiber-filled sleeping bag. And these things were coming out, out of everybody's ears, every supplier, and particularly the cheap suppliers, Sears and those sort of, had their $29.99 fiber-filled sleeping bag. We didn't have a product in that category at all. And so we started working on that. We had a couple of hits and misses. The big hit was our Polar Guard sleeping bags, because we innovated a different construction method than had ever been used before, which resulted in and again, this is this idea of back in the skunk works, right? Let's see if we can tinker with this a little bit, and let's put this together this way instead of that way. And so what we resulted in was a fiber-filled sleeping bag that had to be twice as lofty. And it's because we had this shingle construction method. I won't get into the weeds on that, but it was a different way of doing it. And that put us on the map all of a sudden now in fiber-filled sleeping bags. So those were the Bigfoot and the Littlefoot and the Cat's Meow were up. In the backpack area, a thing which, I don't know, you talk to North Face people today and they're going to go, oh, geez, that thing was a dog. And I guess it was in terms of, purely sales terms or something like that. But as a product I was particularly proud of, it was called the Back Magic Pack. And that was something that we worked on during that period that had a flexible joint between the frame, the rigid frame, external frame, and the hip belt itself. So your hips had this side to side and twisting mobility relative to the pack frame, which we thought was an enhancement, improvement on pack design. And maybe ahead of its time, maybe it wasn't executed as well as it could have been. But the Back Magic Pack is something that happened during that period that I was particularly proud of. Again, because as it was with the oval intention and the fiber-filled sleeping bags, at least our design for them, these are things that we did. Nobody was calling for that. Nobody said, oh, we really need a geodesic dome backpacking tent. We just did that. And people said, well, no, nobody was saying, oh, you need a backpack that has this flexible joint that's really space agey. So nobody was asking us to do that. But we did it. And so there was this pioneering, I don't know what to call it, bravado or something, that we could, create these things out of thin air, even though, we weren't just, Doug Tompkins, the guy from Esprit, he had a kind of an adage that that I remember very well. He said, we're not in business to respond to demand, we're in the business to create demand. In a lot of ways, what we were trying to do at the North Face during those years. In the clothing area, we kind of dabbled with sportswear for the first time.
That was much later.
Was that after 85? I thought that was in that period.
Oh, maybe it was 85, 86.
Yeah. There was a period there where we were kind of, sales are starting to level off, market penetration wasn't happening. We weren't on that upward curve the way we had been. And so we're looking for different ways to keep the thing going. And so we started experimenting with different product areas and different product categories. Ski wear was one. And, you probably have heard Sally or somebody else from the North Hap talk about, how we applied one of the first applications of Gore-Tex to ski wear. Mm-hmm. And so there was that. Another thing we did is a sportswear. And there's a very talented designer that came on at that time by the name of Gibson Mann. And a real character to this day. And he had worked for
Sierra West.
Yeah, Sierra West. He'd worked for Rich Kelty and those guys down there. And so he had this kind of Southern California thing going on. But he came up to Berkeley and he joined our design staff, and he started creating some really kind of clever, interesting sportswear pieces. And Jan, you helped source that.
Right, yes, that was when we started going offshore. Product.
What was happening as often as not, whether it was the Back Magic or the sportswear or, I can think of some other examples, people, reps would say, oh my God, geez, you guys, what are you doing? You're really drifting away from the brand here. Are you sure you know what you're doing? And they're started to develop this kind of skepticism a little bit, which I guess that's healthy. I mean, in the end, nobody got hurt too badly, but it was a kind of a marked difference in the atmosphere around the place. Now you had people second guessing. And then you have to navigate that, So I remember there I was still having to stand up in front of the sales meetings and explain these designs to these guys. And man, they'd get so skeptical, and I would try my best to rationalize a design idea or a product idea for them. I remember at the end of one of those meetings, I was commiserating with Hap, and Hap said, "Mark," he says, "tomorrow when you go in there, just tell those guys, just sell the shit." As if, that's all you had to do to make these guys. That wasn't going to make them happy, but it was kind of an indication of the frustration that was easy to feel in those days.
Right. How did, I guess with that during this period of time, I imagine a lot of the changes that are coming, a lot of the innovations, that some of that corresponds with your upward trajectory growing within the company. You went from, I imagine when you first took that designer role, were you the lead designer of a team of one, and then
I was a one-man design team.
Yeah. So where did that, what were those positions,
that
especially
evolved
during this time that, 75
Well, I
to
should
85.
back up, and I was nothing without my sample maker,
Mm.
and then eventually a woman by the name of Ingrid Harshbarger hired on, and she was a pattern maker.
Yeah, Sally
That
mentioned
meant that I didn't have to do patterns anymore. I wasn't much of a pattern maker, as it turned out. I tried, but I wasn't that great at it. And so now we were a 3-person department: Hisako Haskins, Ingrid Harshbarger, and me. And we, stumbled along like that for a year or two, maybe longer. I think we had to bring on a couple more sample makers. And the point I want to make about that is that too little credit is given to those people. The people behind the scenes. I mean, to this day, if you were to walk into the North Face offices, which I have done several times, and once you get past all the flash, all the big, room size graphics and the entrance foyer, and you walk around there in the back rooms a little bit, and you see these people, sample makers or technical designers, or they're putting together spec packs. Those, to me, are the people. That's what makes it. That's, I rode on those people's shoulders. Sure, maybe I was the front man and I could be glib in front of a sales meeting, but without the other people, it was just nothing. So anyway.
Well, it's the idea too that it's easy to sketch an idea. It's not so easy to take that idea and make it into a product.
Right.
And then even once you make it into a product, to make it producible. So, there are a lot of steps to the process that a lot of times people don't appreciate.
That's right. Yeah. So anyway, now we're entering into the early 80s, mid 80s. As I said, we made a foray into sportswear. So Gib Man came on. Then ski wear seemed to be something that the North Face brand could have some credence in the ski market. And so now a ski wear designer by the name of Danita Rapp came on. And so by that time now, how big was it? I think we had 3 or 4 samples.
Well, you had a pack person and a tent person. And so it was quite a large department at that point.
Yeah, so I was nominally in the head of the design department, but there were a lot of other talented designers underneath me. Then there was some organizational change that happened in which I was tapped to become vice president of sales and marketing. And do you remember what that circumstance was, Jan? I don't remember exactly why they.
I don't remember.
Maybe it was it when Jack went to Samoa or whatever? Anyway, it was kind of an empty seat that needed to be filled. So Hap, once again, he comes and says, "Mark, would you like to be the vice president of sales and marketing?" And so of course I said, sure. And then in that role, I had the design department reporting to me, but I also had 3 product managers. And that was like herding cats. One of them was Sally McCoy. One was Lee Turlington, another interesting guy to talk to. And the third guy was Tom Lane. who was the sales manager for ski wear. And there was a fourth guy who Jan and I later went into business with by the name of Tom Mann. And he was, I guess, nominally...
He was equipment.
Equipment sales manager, but he didn't want to report to me. He was kind of on his own path. So, like I said, it was like trying to herd cats, try to get Sally and Lee and Tom all running in the same direction. That was a challenge for me. I was much happier back in the design room.
What year was that?
What year was that?
Yeah.
Well, that would have been, I left there in 1988. So that would have been in this period leading up to Mountain Jacket, Extreme
You left
Gear.
87.
Huh?
You left 87.
I left in 88. And we started, yeah, 6 of one, half dozen the other. So that was when that happened.
Right.
So then the company changed hands.
Right.
And Bill Simon came on the scene.
Then we all left.
Yeah.
So I guess before we get into that transition where you both step away, Jan, what were some of the highlights between 75, 85? You mentioned kind of the mountain Parka and your, connection to that. What were some of those highlights for you?
Well, then, by then I had moved over to Jack Gilbert decided that the North Face should probably start exploring production outside of the US. Up to that point, every product was made in Berkeley. And there was a lot of pressure to make products overseas. So we started with sleeping bags. And so he asked me if I wanted to help him. So Jack and I were involved in getting products made in Asia. And we didn't even call them North Face. We had our own product name because the North Face didn't want to have any part of product that wasn't made in the US.
Right.
So we had a little product line called Windy Pass. And we made backpacks and sleeping bags, and eventually we made some Gore-Tex products. And then at some point in that period, we decided, okay, I think our sleeping bags are good enough to put the North Face name on them. So we did like a pilot run and brought in some sleeping bags. And our first shipment, of course, it had to be inspected by the North Face quality control people. And they were on heightened alert. They didn't want those things to pass, I'm sure. And so they started opening the boxes. And I don't think this is probably the way it happened, but it's the way I remember it. That in that first box, they pulled out a sleeping bag and there was a needle in it. And so, of course, I told you so. I told you none of these products from China were going to be good. And oh my God. So, of course, that meant they had to open every box and inspect every sleeping bag. And they did that. And that was the only one that didn't pass. And so after that, we were able to, bring in more product. And that was difficult. It was difficult making that transition from Made in USA to bringing in some products. But we found that down products coming from China, I mean, that's where the down comes from in the first place.
Right.
So that seemed like a natural. And so that's where we started. And we had some success. And then we expanded that to make more Gore-Tex products and things like that. But
where could you buy?
The bulk of the manufacturing was coming out of the Berkeley factory.
Right. Where could you buy Windy Pass?
Oh, Well, that's a good question. Not too many people bought Windy Pass. Windy Pass as a product line was not that successful. We tried selling, it was kind of it didn't have the North Face name on it. I guess it said by the North Face, but it was clearly, it was not the prime product.
Well, it was a way for us to dip our toes into the whole world of offshore sourcing.
Right. Yes. Without sullying the name.
Right.
Well, I'm sure that there's got to be
pretty successful, and eventually the down sleeping bags transitioned to our manufacturing in China, and they did a fine job, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some people out there who would love to find some Windy Pass sleeping bags. There's got to be some floating around there.
Yeah, there got to be some.
Somewhere.
Yeah, there probably are.
Huh. So any other high points for you during that time before we kind of get into your transition away from the North Face?
Well, speaking for myself, and not for myself, but the thing that hasn't been mentioned is the whole advent of Gore-Tex and the impact that had on everything, the entire industry. And I'd like to say that North Face was an early adapter on Gore-Tex. I don't think we were particularly. I think wasn't it Sierra West that was one of the first?
I know Early Winters was one, right?
Yeah.
They started to use it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I wouldn't say we came late to that party, but we came after the party had started a little bit. And of course, the Gore people were really eager to get the North Face to buy their product. And so there began a, kind of a symbiotic relationship there, which all too well. But out of that came the initial kind of backpacking products, the Stowaway jacket and the Grizzly Peak. In those days, there were two Gore-Tex fabrics you could get. One was a 40 denier nylon taffeta, really lightweight. And the other was a 3-ply Taslan?
Taslan, yeah.
A heavier fabric. And so he had these two fabrications, and that was it. And so once again, it was like back in the old days trying to figure out how do you make a backpacking tent out of sleeping bag materials, So it was interesting that with the origin of the extreme gear and then the mountain jacket and those sorts of things, which you might want to talk about a little bit. Every time I would go down to talk to the North Face design department, that's what they wanted to hear about. Where did the black shoulder come from? And it was that utilization of the two different fabrications. And the notion was, well, you need a heavy abrasion resistant fabric on the shoulders. Of course you do. What about backpack straps, right? Blah, blah, blah. And yet you wanted the garment to be as lightweight as possible. So you use the lighter fabrication in other areas of the jacket. Maybe you'd use the heavy stuff on the elbows and the shoulder pads, something like that. And North Face in those days was always very mindful of minimizing or maintaining control of stock keeping units.
Because they had their own manufacturing.
Yeah, because we were making it ourselves. And so anytime you wanted to add a color to the line, the production manager, Bruce Hamilton in this case by then, would come in and say, dude, we don't really need a 5th color. 4 colors are just fine. We're not going to stock another 5th color of fabric and zippers and snaps and blah, 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 blah. We're going to get a warehouse full of stuff we can't sell. He was absolutely right. And one of the big problems for the North Face during that period of time was carrying all this excess inventory, stuff that they couldn't sell. And that got to be reach almost crisis proportions there for a while. And but at any rate, so the design solution to that was to cross-fertilize again. So, okay, let's have 3 colors of the lightweight fabrication. Let's have, because The yellow, or what we used to call Acapulco gold, was always kind of a signature North Face color. Red and royal blue. Those would be those three colors. And for the heavy fabrication, we'd only use one color because we don't want to get red, heavy royal blue, and heavy yellow. So it was just purely a pragmatic move, trying to minimize and control the number of stock keep units that led to that initial design concept of the predominantly the black shoulder with the colorful bottom parts.
Right, right. Well, before we kind of step into you're stepping away from the company.
Yeah, we've been going almost 2 hours now. You know
I
that?
know. I don't want to keep you too long. So I guess any last thoughts before maybe we talk about, reasons, you step away or that transition away from the company?
No.
Well, I think we've pretty much covered it. I think what you should get a sense in talking to Jan and me of a company, the North Face company, that existed in a certain time and place,
Mm-hmm.
and almost like a time capsule.
Mm-hmm.
And, this is what I have a hard time, I think, or I don't have a hard time explaining it, but when I go to talk to North Face people these days, that's like an alien thing to them. They don't, when I talk about, it was a skunk works and we used the same fabric, whether it's a sleeping bag or tenor bag, they don't get that. Mm. And so that tells me that we were doing something, and we were doing what we had to do. And, there wasn't tons of capital being poured into the company by outside investors. There were a few outside investors, but it was minuscule amounts, more hobby investors than anybody who was really trying to make a buck. And so, that was a special time and place. And Jan and I were there at the very, kind of the ground floor, not the ground floor back in, the late 60s per se, but, from 1970 up to 1987, Jan says 88, pretty interesting time to be involved in that company.
Right. So I guess, when did you feel like, what went into you feeling like it was time to step away and do something different?
I got fired. That has a way of sharpening your, your thought process about what to do next.
Yeah.
And I did get fired. As a technical matter, it's true. But new ownership had come in. Bill Simon, Odyssey International, had come in and bought the company for a dime. Mm. And that's another whole story that I don't feel qualified really to go into. I don't know all the details, but I know it was quite a bargain price, let's put it that way, that he was able to come in and take control of that company. Mm. And he had his way of doing things. And he wanted to make changes. And he considered himself a designer and a great brand creator. And I don't know if you know anything about Bill or if he figures into your planning at all. He's kind of an interesting, every once in a while you get these guys that come in from left field and they have this outsized influence on an industry or business. He had studied at Berkeley, at Cal, the poetry of Lord Byron. And his ambition was to be a filmmaker, but basically he considered himself an expert on the poetry of Lord Byron. But if you saw this guy, he just considered himself a real wheeler dealer, kind of a skinny Donald Trump, let me put it that way. And just full of himself. And he had these annoying habits of going around talking to my employees around me rather than going through me. And he'd do that with everybody in the company because that was just the way we did things. So it became pretty clear pretty fast that he and I were kind of on a collision course. And I accepted that because, I think if the roles had been reversed, I would have come into a company and I would have thought, well, geez, what is all this dead wood, this old-fashioned way of thinking about things? Let's snap this thing up. Let's get it going. Come on, people. And so he didn't need, me, an old bump on the log, me necessarily gumming things up or slowing things down. And I, on the other hand, had kind of reached a point where I was getting a little frustrated in my role as the vice president of sales and marketing. And I think on retrospect, and if I reflect on that, I think I was probably in a little bit over my head in terms of what the job really demanded and my ability to actually do it. I was very happy in the design room. I wasn't that great at managing sales managers and that sort of thing, being a great marketing guy. And so I started thinking, gee whiz, it'd be nice, maybe I'd like to start my own business. And I remember thinking to myself, gosh darn it, that's what I'm going to do. If I don't do it, I might do it and fail. But if I don't do it at all, I'll always kick myself for not at least having tried. And so I remember Bruce Hamilton came in, took me to lunch one day. He at that time was president of the company. And Bill had said, Bruce, yeah, why don't you pull your buddy Mark aside here and kind of let him go in the nicest way possible. Mark's been great for the company, blah, 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 but he's got to go. So Bruce took me to lunch and delivered the bad news. But between Bill and Bruce, they gave me such a generous severance package. It enabled me to start my own business, Erickson Outdoors. And by that, I mean, they gave me a severance a salary that was more than I expected. And perhaps more significant than that, they gave me an Apple printer that I could hook up to my little 512K Apple desktop computer. But this is this huge monster printer. It was like one of the first laser printers. I swear to God, it was like a $5,000 printer or something like that. It was no joke. It became kind of the crown jewel of our capital. Our capital structure of our company was this printer sitting in the second bedroom of our house, the house we're talking to you from today. Huh. And so I remain grateful to those guys for, not just cutting me out and leaving me in the cold, but giving me a little bit of a chance to get out and spread my own wings a little bit. And so I didn't have much of a concept really, except I knew that I loved design. And I thought, well, maybe I could offer design services to somebody. I don't know, somebody. And by that time, of course, I'd managed to build up, a list of contacts, other people in the industry. And I remember, for example, that the folks at LL Bean, I got along real well with them because the North Face had been doing a lot of private label for them. And a fellow by the name of Roger Poor at Eastern Mountain Sports, another seminal character you should talk to. And these guys, I knew them. They knew me. They trusted me. And so they'd throw me a bone. Here, why don't you try this, try that? And by that, I mean a little small project that I could design and try to execute. And by that, I meant I had to get it made, too. And, how was I going to do that? And Jan, you can kind of fill in the blanks there because Jan soon came along. You left the North Face on your own terms.
Yeah, I did. I left in 89, I think. I thought I left in 88, but around that time. But because I was doing sourcing and production in Asia, that's what Bill Simon's whole company was based on. So I knew that I didn't have much of a future with the company once he took it over, that they were going to take over all of the sourcing and manage it through their Hong Kong office. So I decided to quit the North Face and Mark and our friend Tom Mann and I started our own company. And so, it was like starting all over again. It was
Yeah.
starting all over again. We
Sure.
were in our second bedroom, and
Yeah, we started off in the second bedroom of our house, which, as I said, we're still living in the same house. And then soon we moved in. We took over a corner of space that Bob Swanson and George Marks had down in West Berkeley for their business, Walrus. And they carved out a little corner of their warehouse for us, and so we all shared that space together. That was a special time.
yeah.
And so yeah, I think one of the first jobs we had was doing something for Roger Port, Eastern Mountain Sports.
Well, LL Bean sleeping bags. We did
LL Bean sleeping. That was a big feather in our cap.
Yeah.
Because LL Bean. And they came to us and said, we need a line of sleeping bags, goose down sleeping bags, and we need you to not only design them, we need you to get the damn things made and deliver them to us. And so that was a great start for us. And then I did some kind of odd jobs. I did a little design project for Sportif USA. Sportif USA used to be a sportswear brand, ski wear. They came up with the first stretch short, hiking short. And that's another whole story. That's funny. You remember back in those days where the style was real short and really skin tight. Stretch. Kind of goofy looking in retrospect. But I did a few kind of odd jobs like that. But the big one was LL Bean, then Eastern Mountain Sports. And then a big breakthrough for us was West Marine Products that wanted us to design a foul weather, their top niche in their product offering, foul weather gear for sailing. And Tom and I had done some sailing together, so we kind of felt like we had an affinity. We knew what was required product-wise. And so we designed foul weather gear, bib, an over jacket, and a couple of other things for them. And started producing that. And then Shades of the North Face and the Oval Intention tent poles. We get a phone call one day from West Marine. Hey, these jackets you sent us, the colors are bleeding. Because we'd made these, it was red on top and white on bottom. White on the bottom. So this two-tone, jazzy looking. Was it called the Explorer or something, Jan? I can't remember what they called it.
Beautiful jacket. But
and anyway, they called us and said, "No, damn it, your colors are bleeding on us. What are you going to do? Because now we don't have red and white jackets, we have pink jackets." And so once again, I swear to God, our company wasn't more than a year or two old, if that.
No money.
We maybe had 2 dimes rubbed together, but the whole company, the whole reputation was riding on whether or not we were going to make good on that. And so we thought, well, who can we blame this on? And we went back to the guy who had sold us the fabric, the faulty fabric, and he said, "Oh, no, not me. Come on. Buyer beware. You get what you pay for." Okay, thanks, buddy. And we went back to the manufacturer that had actually done the sewing, and they said, "Oh, no, not us. We don't test for that sort of thing. What do you want us to do?" So there, Tom and Jan and I, probably over dinner one night, looking at each other across the table and said, "What are we going to do here, folks?" And we figured out some way to dig deep. I don't know how we did it, but we made good. We went out and remade those jackets, delivered them faster. Then, we beat the revised timeline on it. And I thought, sometimes the proudest moments in your life come from when you can, make good on a mistake you've made. And, you're talking about going out and seeing one of your products in the field, and how does that make you feel proud? And there's that, of course, but what made me feel proud was being able to address these problems and then have your customer come back and say, "Gosh darn it, you did the right thing." That's all I needed. So anyway, from then we retained the customer for a while longer, not forever. And one thing led to another. We were just kind of cooking along. We, by that time, had established some contract sewing shops. Well, we didn't establish the shops, but we established relationships with contract sewers in San Francisco, in Oakland, down in San Leandro. And there were, I don't know, maybe 4, 5, 6 little contract shops, you know, where there's maybe 15, 20 operators. And they were called CMT shops, cut, make, and trim. They wouldn't design it. They wouldn't buy the materials. All they were going to do, they would cut it and they would make it and they'd trim the loose threads off of it. And then they'd want to be paid. And so we had to figure out how to do all those other parts, which meant managing the fabric inventory and, you know, financing the production somehow. And the big breakthrough for us was that for the most part, and particularly with the larger customers, we'd go with our, you know, we'd go to make our sales presentation. We'd show this beautiful product that we designed. And then we'd close with, there's one other thing we've got to tell you. We need you to pay us up front for this. And, you know, they go, what? What are you talking about? No, we need you to put up a letter of credit so that we can take that letter of credit and go over to the factory in Asia, if it was Asia. Usually, if it was domestic stuff, we could finance that out of our own accounts. But the big things, we had to get letters of credit. Well, and miracle of miracles, they were willing to do that for us. And boy, talk about a thing that made a difference. So there we were. We had a business model, which really, we didn't make a single stitch unless we'd already sold it. So we knew we weren't going to get stuck with a whole lot of excess inventory. We had some, inevitably, but it wasn't a huge problem as it had been if we'd been making things on spec. And the other thing was that for the large bulk of the production, we had our customer financing it. Mm. So we were, you know, for 3 folks who didn't have a whole lot of resources behind us, were able to put together a pretty interesting business there. It finally reached a point in late 2000, I want to say late 2008 or 9 or 10 or something like that. We reached a point where we had 22 employees and sales, you know, in the several millions of dollars. Hmm. And we're thinking, wow, we're pretty proud of ourselves. Look what we built all on our own. No outside investors, except for our customers, of course. And then our partner, Tom, developed cancer in 2010. And that, unfortunately, we lost Tom there in 2010. And then at that point, we had all these employees. Jan and I are looking at each other. The business had kind of taken a turn by that point. We had allowed ourselves to become controlled by a single customer. And that was a customer that was for whom we were making golf jackets, golf pants, golf jackets, golf shirts. Titleist FootJoy. And they liked what we were doing. We were making it real easy for them to get into this kind of ancillary business for them. They're interested. They were usually selling golf balls, right? So we opened up this whole different category for them. And so we had a very good relationship there for a long time. And Tom ran that business. And but things are starting to change. Our other customers, Athleta, Title IX, LL Bean, they started figuring out how to do those things that we had been doing for them and charging them dearly for. Well, they got to thinking, no, wait a minute. As these, you know, let's say we'd start with an order from pick one out of the hat, Land's End. And okay, they give us an order for 1,000 pieces, some minimum production run thing. We could make all the fabric minimums work and everything. If that product took off, they'd come back another season. Okay, now we need 3,000 pieces, and so on and so forth. At some point, the volumes got to be, somebody, the bean counters back there started looking at the numbers and say, how much are we paying Erickson again? What? Because we charge a percentage add-on top of the, the direct product cost. And I think that the bean counters there started to say, yeah, maybe we can do this ourselves. How expensive can it really be to hire a designer? I mean, come on. And we have contacts over there in Asia. We can do this on our own. And so gradually we saw that our customers were starting to usurp or take over the services that we'd been providing. And we started thinking, well, that's logical. That makes sense. We weren't bitter about it at all. And that finally, but when that happened with our biggest customer, we thought, whoa, this is a game changer here. And then, as I said, our partner, Tom, passed away. And so it was kind of a fundamental eye-opening moment for Jan and me, I think. And Jan, you can answer this as well as anybody, but I know in my heart, I thought I would really, I've been at this a long time. I was at the North Face for 18 years, and we did Erickson Outdoors for over 21 years, I think it was. And I thought, gosh darn, I've been at this a long time. I just as soon spend my time now having fun with my wife as my partner, not my business partner, my partner in life. And so, I don't know, we thought, now maybe it's a good time to shut the door on this thing. So we tried to make sure we could find jobs for all our employees. We had this very gradual, this big customer at Untitled Chapter gave us about a 3-year off-ramp. So again, they were very, wasn't a guillotine shop. They said, listen, 3 years from now, we're not going to be doing business with you. And so that allowed us to transition in kind of a very logical, sane way, for which, again, I'm grateful.
Well, I guess with that said, what do you look forward to now? Now that you've got to still think about product in a way. Probably don't necessarily want to get into that game, but that's probably got to be something that sticks with you.
Well, I want Jan to weigh in on this, but again, for myself, you said something at the very top of this meeting, which was that you had hoped your students weren't just, and your program wasn't just about pumping more product out there. That the product had to somehow mean something, had to do something, had to make a difference. And I contemplated after we closed down Erickson Outdoors, actually before that, I thought maybe we should start our own brand. What the hell? We've got designers, we got factories, we got the know-how. And I couldn't think of anything that the world needed that wasn't already there and in pretty good form. And certainly not in the field of outdoor products. And so I thought, I don't think I can add very much to this conversation right now. So I determined I wasn't going to do that, and I'm glad that we did not try to do that. Jan and I often sit here at night when we're looking at the COVID news, thinking, "Oh my God, could you imagine if we were trying to keep those 20 people employed now and maintaining relationships with all these factories and oh my God, please no." So I look back on that time with great fondness, but not a lot of regret. And that we're where we are now. For myself, I still like to tinker down in my little workshop, and so I'm working on some little kind of crafty types of projects. I'm trying to work on a special type of lamp based off, who Osamu Noguchi is, the famous Japanese designer, and he has these beautiful rice paper lanterns. He's ubiquitous, they're all over, and he does some other things. And I've always been kind of inspired by that, so I'm kind of trying to do an interpretation of Osamu Noguchi lamps. The other thing I've taken interest in lately is theater and acting. And there's a little theater group up the coast called the Sea Ranch Thespians, and they need help. they especially need male acting talent because there ain't very many people my age in the male category of the male persuasion that is willing to stand up and memorize lines and act. But I've always had great fun doing that, and I get a great deal of satisfaction from that. And we were just started rehearsals on what would have been a pretty interesting play when the COVID thing came down in March. And of course we had to shut everything down. And we thought, well, maybe we'll get together in the fall. No, you're not getting together in the fall. Well, and now I haven't heard anything about next spring. You know, my fingers are crossed, but gosh.
I think you're 2022.
Yeah, it could be. And by that time, the play that we were planning on doing, I think, has lost all of its relevance. So I'm going to think of something else to do. Go ahead, Jan.
Well, I've actually managed to sort of stay connected in the outdoor world. I work for a little company called Slingfin.
Oh, yeah. Al Tabor brought them up. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, I do the bookkeeping for them, and kind of haven't done much since COVID, but prior to that, I would go down there and, you know, I'd hang out in the office. And so you pick up things just through osmosis when that happens. So they're always working on a tent, and they've got a couple of packs that they were working on. So so I enjoy kind of just being around that and around people involved in the process. So that's what I've been doing.
Well, mention creative growth, Jan.
Oh,
No,
yeah. I was trying to connect it to the outdoor business, but
well, it's not. Neither is theater, particularly.
True. Yes, I volunteer my time at an art studio for disabled adults. So, and I love it. I enjoy it. But again, they're closed down for COVID. So everything's just on hold right now.
Right. Yeah, we definitely are in a holding pattern. Well,
yeah.
And then we have the other great production of our life is our 29-year-old daughter, Emily. And I could tell you funny stories about when she was a little kid sitting underneath in her little baby carrier underneath Jan's desk down at Erickson Outdoors when we were trying to, we used to say we had two babies, Erickson Outdoors and little Emily, and trying to keep both of them fed and going. And she's now pursuing a PhD program in entomology. So we'll see what happens there.
Well, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Well, you know, with kind of the world shutting down in a way, and that does provide time for reflection. I imagine, well, for a lot of the people that we've talked with, they say, oh yeah, I get to think about my time in the outdoor industry or my contributions. Maybe kind of as a parting, you know, question, or, you know, I'd pose to you both is, when you look back on those times, what are some of the thoughts, and I guess where you see yourself in the history of the industry, and I guess just what are your thoughts as you reflect back on your contributions to the industry?
Well, for me, it was, I would say it was a real time of growth for me personally, you know, professionally. In fact, I have a friend of my daughter's who's working at Slingfin, and I've talked to him about his role there. And the idea that he's working in this small company and is able to, you know, design some product and figure out how to get it sold and solve some production problems. I was very fortunate to be at the North Face when it was this family atmosphere, and I had the freedom to get involved in many aspects of business and product, and so it was the best time of my life, really.
Yeah, for me, I mean, that's been my career, and I kind of stumbled into it that day. on my bicycle when I saw the big colorful piles of nylon and heard the little birds chirping from inside the building. And that's what I've done, since then, has been involved in the North Face, or our own business, Erickson Outdoors. I consider myself extremely fortunate, extremely lucky to have been given the chances, the opportunities that I've been given, whether it's been by HAP or I even have to, I have to thank this fellow Bill Simon who fired me, because he kind of gave me the push, off the log to start Erickson Outdoors, which turned out to be, much more significant career-wise, frankly, for me than the North Face even. I can look back on the North Face and the designs and all that sort of thing, and it warms my heart every time I see somebody talk about, oh man, I have one of your sleeping bags from back in those days. It still serves me well. Or I have an oval intention, and it's still, I use it every camping trip I go on. That just warms my heart, of course. So I've just been one of the lucky ones. That's all I can say.
Well, I think we all are, for being able to work in this industry. And I appreciate you being so generous with your time. I know this was a long one, but I appreciate you being willing to share stories and your contributions and your thoughts and feelings. And this is fun for me, just to hear your part in all of this.
Well, I hope you can make use of it somehow.
We absolutely will. I can guarantee we'll make a use out of it. So,
sure.
I think we'll call it here. But thank you both for taking the time.
Well, thank you.
Great. Yeah.
Thank you, Chase.
Yeah, of course.